Okay, so what if I told you there's a hidden formula that governs pretty much everything? Today, we are diving deep into one single, super ambitious theory, one that claims balance isn't just a feeling we have, but a mathematical constant that shapes entire galaxies and even our own personal sense of just, feeling stable. And really, that's the big question for today's explainer. What if harmony, what if balance has a universal code? Well, Crippin's theory says it does. It proposes this framework, suggesting that the same math that structures the cosmos also orchestrates our very consciousness. It's a huge idea. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll tackle the main idea of a formula for balance. Then we'll get into the core equation itself. After that, we'll see how it supposedly maps onto our minds, how it can scale up to design entire cities, and finally, we'll look at the pretty profound ethical choice it leaves us with. All right, first things first, we need to totally redefine what we even mean when we say the word balance, because this theory starts by just throwing out our most common assumption. You see, the theory's first big move is to completely redefine balance. It's not about being perfectly still, like a set of perfectly weighted scales. Nope. Instead, true equilibrium is an active process, a constant, calibrated exchange between forces. Think of it like a universal give and take. So, how does this idea of a dynamic rhythm turn into something you can actually measure? Well, that brings us right to the mathematical heart of this theory, where this big, abstract concept gets its very own equation. And here it is, the ATLS equation. So T, which stands for balance, is calculated by multiplying three key things. First, you've got P for proportion. That's the underlying geometric design of a system. Then there's kappa, that's the Greek letter K, for phase, which is all about timing and rhythm. And finally, R for resonance, the stable, coherent energy that kind of holds the whole thing together. To make this a little more real, just imagine you're running a marathon. Proportion, P, that's your perfect stride length, the ideal geometric design for how you move. Phase, K, that's your perfect pace, the rhythm and timing that lets you keep going for miles. And resonance, R, that's the sustained, coherent energy you hit when you're in the zone, preventing you from burning out. When you get all three of those aligned, you achieve T, a state of perfect dynamic balance. Okay, so if this math is universal, the theory argues it's got to be fundamental to the human mind, too. And this is where we get to the four primitives, these basic geometric shapes that supposedly form the actual language of our thoughts and feelings. First up, we've got the triangle. This shape symbolizes clarity, focus, and direction. Psychologically, you can think of it as your focused attention, that moment you make a clear decision or set a specific goal. Next up is the circle, which represents connection and wholeness. This is the geometry of empathy, of emotional self-regulation, and that amazing feeling of being in a state of flow. It's all about returning to a feeling of completeness. Then we have the square. This one is all about stability and structure. The theory connects this to our executive functions, our ability to set boundaries, create systems, and feel grounded, safe, and secure. And last but not least, the spiral. The spiral represents growth and integration. It's about learning from what's happened and adapting for what's next. It's basically a visual metaphor for neuroplasticity itself. So, when you put it all together, these four shapes are basically proposed as a fundamental vocabulary for our inner world. The whole idea is to give us a way to map our complex emotional states, to turn these abstract feelings into a clear geometric language we can understand. And why is that even useful? Well, the theory suggests that this geometric language can help us reduce the internal friction we all have between our brain's two major operating modes. You can think of it as the wandering mind, which daydreams and reflects, and the focused mind, which gets stuff done. The goal is to create a sense of harmony between the two. Okay, so we've seen this theory go from the scale of the cosmos all the way down into our own minds. Now let's scale it back out and see how this internal geometry could be used to literally build our external world. Now, this is where the theory makes a really bold claim. It argues that ancient monuments, like the Ziggurat of Ur, the Great Pyramid, and Borobudur, aren't just placed randomly. Instead, they're seen as specific nodes in a planetary harmonic grid, intentionally aligned with mathematical constants. And here's the really cool part. Look how these ancient building types supposedly link right back to that core equation. The pyramid is said to embody proportion, or P, representing a clear, focused intention. The ziggurat represents phase, K, a calibrated rhythmic journey upward. And the dome embodies resonance, R, creating acoustic harmony and a shared collective experience. This quote from the source material just perfectly captures that shift in thinking. It suggests we can take these ancient principles of harmonic design and use them to create a totally new kind of world. And that brings us to this concept of living ratio cities, which is a blueprint for urban design based on the theory. I mean, just imagine cities with circular transit loops instead of traffic jams, green spaces that grow and expand like natural fractals, and a core rule that for every built surface, you have to have a matching living one. The whole point is to design cities that basically function like a living, self-balancing organism. Now, I know, this all sounds incredibly idealistic, right? Which leads us to the final and maybe the most important section of all, the deep ethical questions that a theory of universal harmony like this brings up. And this really gets to the ethical core of the theory, and it all rests on one simple but incredibly powerful principle: choice. Because as the theory argues, a perfectly harmonious world is totally meaningless if people are forced into it. True balance, true harmony, has to be a voluntary state. It has to be freely chosen, not demanded. And that leaves us with this final lingering question. If a world built on these principles of balance, proportion, and resonance were actually possible, but, and this is the big but, participation had to be completely voluntary, what kind of world would we actually choose to create? And what does that choice really say about us?